In a world where corporate titles often overshadow the people on the ground, one CEO dared to trade his suit for grease-stained gloves, and what he uncovered would shake an empire. This is the story of a fearless black female mechanic, a hidden identity, and a company built on broken tools and broken trust. But from beneath the weight of silence, betrayal and pain, something extraordinary rose: justice, change, and the quiet power of those the world tries to overlook. Stay with us because this story will challenge everything you think you know about leadership dignity and what it truly means to rebuild. The sharp clatter of steel hitting concrete rang out through the dimly lit workshop as the wrench slipped from Keisha Morgan's grip, slicing clean through the soft skin between her fingers. The pain was immediate, electric, but she didn't scream. Instead, she drew in a sharp breath through clenched teeth and pressed her lips together, refusing to show weakness. Blood pooled in her palm and trickled down her wrist, mixing with the grime and sweat already coating her arms from hours spent beneath the hood of a corroded Nissan Altima. The garage was stifling no air conditioning, one overhead fan that clattered uselessly, and rows of faulty equipment held together by duct tape, rust, and sheer willpower. Keisha's eyes flicked upward to the glass office suspended like a judge's box above the garage floor, where Dean Weller, the regional manager, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, laughing at something on his phone. He hadn't seen the wrench fall. He hadn't seen her bleeding. He never did. She tore a strip from an old rag on the bench, wrapped it tightly around her hand, and flexed her fingers even as blood seeped through the fabric. Just then, a voice sounded behind her, low, curious, unfamiliar. "You all right?" She turned slightly to see the new guy, tall, lean, worn-out cap, pulled low over his forehead, hands calloused like a man used to heavy labor. He'd been introduced that morning as Joe, a temporary assistant hired to lift and haul. "Yeah, I'm fine," Keisha said, voice flat, just another day at Coleridge. She turned back to the engine without looking at him. "We don't get fancy safety kits down here." Unbeknownst to her, the man watching her wasn't just any new hire. 3 days ago, he had driven in from the city before dawn, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in through the back entrance wearing steel-toe boots and faded jeans. No one recognized him, not the mechanics, not Dean, and certainly not Keisha. Because Joe was Nathan Cole, the 42-year-old CEO of Coleridge Motors, a company his late father had built from a single garage in Detroit into a nationwide chain of automotive service centers. And now, standing here in the middle of this neglected garage that still bore his family's name on the weather-worn sign outside Nathan, was watching in stunned silence as a woman bled through her bandage working with tools that should have been scrapped a decade ago. Her pride stronger than pain, her voice sharper than steel, and he realized in that moment just how far his company had fallen. Nathan kept his head down as he followed Keisha to the far end of the garage where a half-dismantled transmission sat on a rusting metal table. The air smelled of scorched rubber and leaked coolant, and the floor was slick with a mixture of oil and old rain that had dripped in through the cracked ceiling tiles. He pretended to be busy himself with stacking used tires, but his eyes never left Keisha. Her movements were sharp, efficient, despite the obvious pain in her wrapped hand. With her good arm, she hefted a gearbox that looked like it weighed half her body weight and balanced it expertly on a makeshift lift. Held together with zip ties and prayer, Nathan had spent a lifetime around machines. He knew what safe equipment looked like, and this wasn't it. A torque wrench lay nearby, its handle held together with black electrical tape. The drill she used had a cracked casing and no grounding. A hydraulic jack oozed dark fluid beneath the frame of a customer's car, its safety valve missing. "Why is everything in here broken?" Nathan asked, trying to sound naive. Keisha let out a dry chuckle. Not looking up, "Welcome to the real world, rookie. The day Dean Weller approves a budget for new tools is the day pigs fly out that skylight." She pointed to a panel of cloudy glass above them, long since painted over with grime. "So, you just make do?" Nathan asked, already knowing the answer. "We patch, we improvise, we pray. It doesn't kill us," Keisha replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her unbandaged wrist. "Dean drives a brand new Lexus and tells us the company can't afford gloves that don't have holes." Just then, the sound of footsteps clomped down the steel staircase leading from the office above. Dean Weller's voice echoed before his body came into view. "Keisha, that Civic was supposed to be out the door an hour ago. What are you waiting for? A miracle." He didn't look at her bandaged hand. "He didn't care. And you," he barked, turning to Nathan, "boxes to the back warehouse. unless you want your first week to be your last. Nathan nodded silently and turned away. But he noticed something. The moment Dean stopped yelling, Keisha had gone rigid like someone bracing for an impact that never came. Her jaw-clenched eyes low, back straight. The reaction of someone far too used to being barked at, dismissed, and pushed down. As Nathan carried boxes into the dusty storage room, he passed a broken metal cabinet that had long ago lost its lock. Inside were stacks of faded manila folders, some of them bulging with photos and crumpled reports. On a whim, he pulled one out. Accident reports, dozens cuts, bruises a shattered finger, chemical burns, and the same name kept reappearing. Keisha Morgan. Most incidents were marked as employee negligence, but it wasn't the injuries that made Nathan's blood run cold. It was the corporate memo attached to the last report. A memo from Dean Weller proudly declared a cost efficiency program that involved postponing equipment upgrades indefinitely, signed and approved, not just by Dean, but by someone in Nathan's financial department. Nathan stood frozen in front of the open cabinet, his fingers gripping the edge of a manila folder stained with time and oil, his pulse thudding in his ears. Inside were stacks of faded accident reports, paper after paper listing deep cuts, sprained joints, crushed fingers, chemical burns, all attributed to employee error or failure to follow protocol. But one name kept surfacing with unsettling frequency: Keisha Morgan. Her injuries were chronicled with chilling regularity, and yet no corrective action was noted. No equipment was replaced. At the back of the file, stapled to the last report, was something even more damning: a corporate memo titled Cost Optimization Strategy. Regional implementation, written and signed by Dean Weller himself. It laid out in polished executive jargon a clear directive to delay or deny all non-essential equipment, maintenance and replacement in favor of maintaining quarterly profit margins. More shocking still was the approval stamp below, digitally signed by someone in Nathan's financial department. He stared at the signature his initials scrawled in recommendation notes attached to the program months ago when it was sold to him as a lean, data-driven budget strategy. Now he saw it for what it was: an excuse to save money by gambling with human lives. Back on the floor, Keisha was struggling with a brake caliper that refused to release. Her bandaged hand was trembling slightly, whether from pain, fatigue, or both. Nathan couldn't tell. Without a word, he knelt beside her and offered support, steadying the part as she worked. Their hands brushed briefly. She didn't flinch, she didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. There was something quietly powerful in her stillness, an endurance born not from ignorance, but from necessity. Finally, as they both sat back against the garage wall to catch their breath, Nathan turned to her and asked, "Why do you stay here with all of this?" With him, his voice was gentle, not patronizing, just searching. Keisha let out a bitter laugh, low and tired. "Because I've been told in 6 different ways that there's no place else for someone like me. 3 shops told me, straight up, they don't have space. 2 asked if I was applying to clean, not fix. 1 said I'd be a distraction in the bay and offered $7 less than they pay the kid, who still doesn't know where the radiator cap is." She paused, then looked at him with eyes that held no resentment, only truth. "Here, at least they know I can fix a car. That's more than I get most places. Even if I have to bleed for it." Nathan had no words. Not yet. Because what do you say when you finally see the damage your silence has caused? That night, long after the sun had dipped behind the rusted roof of the garage, he sat alone in his car, staring through the windshield at the crooked sign that bore his family name. Coleridge Motors, once a symbol of craftsmanship and pride, now the cover for a system that tolerated harm as long as the numbers stayed green. Nathan closed his eyes and for the first time in years truly saw the people behind the profit sheets, and he made a silent promise to himself, right there under the flickering street lamp. This ends now. Before the sun had even crept over the rooftops, Nathan was already parked across the street from the garage, sitting silently in his car with the engine off and the worn cap pulled low over his brow. He watched as Keisha limped across the cracked pavement, her steps steady, but strained the same filthy rag wrapped around her injured hand from the day before. The sight of her bruised, exhausted, and still showing up without complaint hit him with the weight of everything he now knew. This woman was pouring her blood, quite literally, into a company that didn't even bother to learn her name. A company bearing the logo of his father's legacy. Nathan's grip tightened around the steering wheel, his jaw locked in frustration. His phone vibrated in the console beside him. It was a message from Dana, Kim, the company's legal advisor, and one of the few executives Nathan still trusted. All documents prepared. Surveillance logs, payroll anomalies, and audit results. Meeting confirmed at 2 p.m. Confidential. Should I bring Sophia? Nathan typed back without hesitation. Yes, just you and the auditor, no one else. Dana understood more than most. Her family had known Nathan's father, and she had grown up believing in the integrity Coleridge Motors once stood for. That belief hadn't faded, not even when the board prioritized margins over morals. She had stood by Nathan when he began to question the numbers, when he asked for quiet investigations, and when he finally went undercover. Now the final pieces were almost in place. Inside the garage, the workday began, like every other, with shouting. Dean Weller's voice bellowed down the metal staircase as he stomped into the bay, clipboard in hand, ego leading the way. "All right, folks, listen up," he called, ignoring the stiff posture of every mechanic within earshot. "Head office wants tighter numbers. This quarter. That means no overtime, no tool replacements, unless something explodes, and absolutely no whining. You got that?" His eyes locked onto Keisha like a predator spotting prey. "Especially you. I've had it with your complaints. Gloves, drills, jacks. You think we're made of money?" Keisha stood her ground, even as her wrapped hand pulsed beneath the rag. "I'm asking for basic safety equipment, Dean. The kind required by law. You know that." Dean sneered, his voice rising with mockery. "Oh, the law. You think anyone's coming to save a part-time grease monkey because she cried OSHA into her coffee? Please, you're lucky I haven't replaced you with someone less difficult." His tone dropped just enough to carry an unspoken threat. Nathan watched it all unfold from behind a rack of tires, fists curled inside his sleeves. He spent the next few hours working beside Keisha again, learning from her without making it obvious. She was astonishing, able to diagnose engine failure by ear rewire, a faulty alternator with a stripped connector and a paperclip, all while masking the pain that radiated from her hand. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her movements efficient. "Where'd you learn all this?" Nathan asked during a lull in the noise. "From my dad," Keisha replied without looking up. "He ran a shop back in West Haven, taught me everything, before the rent doubled and the chain stores moved in. First time I saw a corporate logo on a garage, I knew it was over." Nathan's stomach sank. West Haven. That was the site of Coleridge's third major acquisition, Metro Fix Auto. A small chain his financial team had labeled low risk, low value, and absorbed without a second glance. It was Nathan's first major executive decision, one he'd been praised for. And now, sitting beside the daughter of one of the very people his deal had crushed, Nathan felt that praise curdle into shame. Keisha continued, her voice bitter but controlled. "They didn't just take his shop. They took everything he built. I watched him go from proud to broken in a year. That's why I never stopped working, because no one's handing out second chances in this business, especially not to women who look like me." Nathan said nothing. He couldn't, because the woman he had unknowingly pushed to the margins was now the very one holding up everything he was supposed to stand for. And at 2 p.m., when Dana and Sophia arrived with audit files and digital evidence in hand, Nathan knew exactly who he was fighting for. At exactly 2 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled into the alley behind the garage, unnoticed by the workers inside. Nathan discreetly slipped away from the shop floor, wiping his hands on a rag to maintain his cover. He met Dana Kim and Sophia Kaminsky, the sharp-eyed forensic auditor in the back office of a diner across the street, a neutral zone beyond Dean's arrogant surveillance. Dana handed him a thick folder and a tablet synced with secure files. "We found everything," she said, calmly. Dean didn't just ignore safety violations. He embezzled funds intended for equipment. Replacement digital signatures were forged. He diverted maintenance budgets through ghost vendors and rerouted invoices through dummy accounts. Sophia nodded, tapping her screen to reveal layered spreadsheets and altered documents. A basic audit wouldn't catch it, but with the full forensic pass you authorized, we tracked the entire funnel. He's been covering up accidents for years. Real incident rates are nearly 10 times higher than reported. Nathan's heart pounded, not from surprise, but from fury. Then Dana added, "There's more." She passed him a phone, anonymous tip sent just an hour ago. On the screen played a grainy but clear video of Dean sitting across from another manager in a nearby location, laughing over lunch. I hired that black girl just to shut HR up about the whole diversity crap, Dean snickered. She even knows how to fix stuff, which is hilarious. But the second she starts making noise about safety, she's out. Blake never shows up anyway. Nathan's face darkened. His absence had been weaponized. Do we have everything we need? He asked, voice low. Dana answered without hesitation. And then, the question is, how far do you want this to go? Nathan stood up, jaw tight, all the way. Back inside the garage, the pressure was building. A luxury vehicle, a Mercedes owned by the city's deputy mayor, had just been towed in for emergency service. Dean, seeing the opportunity to show off, strutted around barking orders, suddenly invested in every detail. Keisha, take care of this personally, he demanded. And no drama. That car is worth more than your life. Nathan watched as Keisha knelt beside the vehicle, preparing to elevate it, using a floor jack. He immediately recognized it was the same cracked unit he had flagged 2 days ago, the one leaking fluid and whimpering under strain. As she positioned it carefully, Nathan's instinct screamed, something was wrong. Just as Dean ushered the deputy mayor through the bay, spouting rehearsed lines about investment in top-tier equipment, the jack emitted a sickening groan. Keisha, move. Nathan shouted, but she had already sensed it. In a single motion, she rolled out from under the car as the jack collapsed with a violent crash, sending the front of the Mercedes slamming into the floor. A split second later, and she would have been crushed. A stunned silence rippled through the garage, broken only by the mayor's pale gasp. My God, someone could have died. Dean's face drained of color as he scrambled to recover. It's an isolated incident, probably human error or sabotage. Keisha stood, fists clenched, voice shaking but fierce. It wasn't an error. I've reported Jack 3 times. I have the emails. I've filled out the forms. You ignored them all. Dean, red with fury and humiliation, snapped, "You're fired, effective immediately." He didn't notice the way the customers nearby had pulled out their phones. He didn't notice the slight knowing smile tugging at the corners of Nathan's mouth. Because what Dean had also failed to see was that every word, every insult, every threat had just been recorded, not only by the customers, but by the phones in Nathan's, Dana's, and Sophia's pockets. And the man he just fired was about to fire him. As Dean's voice echoed through the garage, ringing with false authority and blind rage, Nathan stepped forward with measured calm, every eye turning toward him as he removed his worn cap and let it drop quietly to the floor. "No one is getting fired today," he said, his voice steady, clear, and chillingly authoritative. "Except you, Dean." A ripple of confusion passed through the room as Dean blinked, caught off guard by the shift in tone. "Who the hell do you think you—" He started but stopped mid-sentence as recognition slowly spread across his face. "Nathan? Cole?" he stammered, eyes wide. The garage fell into stunned silence as every mechanic, every customer, every passerby registered what was happening. The assistant with oil on his hands, the quiet man lifting engines and sweeping floors, was in fact the CEO of Coleridge Motors. "That's right," Nathan replied in his expression unreadable, "and I've seen enough." Dana and Sophia entered through the bay doors, both holding tablets, both recording, both ready. "We've conducted a full investigation." Dana announced, her tone crisp and professional. "We have evidence of embezzlement, falsified safety records, manipulated reports, and discriminatory hiring practices. Most of it orchestrated by you, Dean." Dean took a step back, face-flushed, voice faltering. This is ridiculous. You can't. Actually, we can." Sophia interrupted, tapping her screen to display a video clip, the same one where Dean proudly bragged about hiring Keisha as a token to satisfy HR and threatening to fire her the moment she spoke up. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Nathan stepped closer, eyes locked on Dean. "You put lives at risk for a bonus check. You lied to the board. You endangered my employees, and you mocked the very values this company was founded on." Dean pointed a shaking finger. "Your numbers, your targets. I did what I had to do to make your damn goals." Nathan didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I didn't tell you to silence people, to ignore injuries, to insult the very people who keep these doors open. That was your choice, and now you live with it." Security entered on cue, silently flanking Dean as he sputtered and shouted threats of wrongful termination and legal action while being escorted out of the building. As the door slammed shut behind him, Nathan turned back to the staff. Effective immediately. This garage is closed for full renovation. Every employee will receive paid leave until we reopen with new tools, new systems, and new management. And if she's willing, he added, glancing toward Keisha, we'll rebuild this place under the leadership of someone who actually knows how to fix more than just cars. Keisha stood still, her face unreadable, her injured hand at her side. Why should I trust you? She asked, finally the room still hanging on her words. Nathan didn't look away. You shouldn't. Not yet. I let this happen. I looked away for too long, but if you come on board, you'll have full authority to design the safety systems. No requests denied, no corners cut. You'll be compensated for everything you've endured, and no one, not even me, will stand in your way again. The garage was silent. The old world had just collapsed, and something new was rising from the ashes, but only if Keisha was willing to be part of it. Keisha's eyes remained fixed on Nathan, searching his face for even a flicker of insincerity, a trace of executive spin beneath the calm words. But what she saw instead was something that caught her off guard. Remorse not rehearsed, not performative, but real, and rooted in a man who had finally seen the human cost of his distance. The silence lingered for a moment longer before she exhaled and said quietly but firmly, I'll hold you to every word you just said. Nathan nodded once. I expect you to. Hours later, the garage stood still for the first time in years. No clanging tools, no shouting, no customers hurrying in or out. Just a team of workers standing stunned in the aftermath of a storm they hadn't seen coming, some still unsure what this all meant, others quietly hopeful for the first time. Nathan walked out with Dana and Sophia, heading back across the street to the temporary command center they had set up in the diner, but not before leaving behind a final instruction. I want a full audit of all locations, surprise inspections, real ones, starting today. Back at headquarters that evening, Nathan reviewed the blueprints for the renovation, while Keisha, now officially hired as interim safety director for the region, sat across from him with a pen in one hand and a file in the other. This vent system, she said, pointing, won't handle the exhaust load during peak hours. We need 30% more capacity, or we risk another respiratory complaint. Nathan didn't hesitate. Approved. What else? Keisha raised a brow, slightly surprised by the immediate green light. You sure about that? It's not cheap. Cheap is what got us into this mess, he replied. We do this right. Then she leaned forward, her voice lower, more serious. If Dean was doing this here, who else is out there cutting corners and hiding reports? Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to Dana, who entered the room carrying a thick folder marked Preliminary Audit Results. Without a word, she placed it on the table and flipped it open. 3 other managers, she said, already removed, more are under review. We're installing live compliance trackers in every garage, 1 missed. Form, 1 red flag, and it goes straight to Keisha's desk. Keisha looked down at the title beneath her name. Director of Safety and Standards, Coleridge Motors. The words didn't erase the scars on her hands, but they meant something. They meant she would never again be silenced behind a wall of oil noise and fear. Just then Nathan's phone rang. It was Frank Mills, the company's CFO. Nathan answered, expecting resistance, and he wasn't disappointed. Nathan? This is insane. The renovation costs are out of control. The board's furious. You're tanking the quarter. They're calling an emergency vote. Tomorrow. Nathan didn't flinch. Bring it on, he said simply. And Frank, if you signed off on Dean's forged approvals, I suggest you start writing your resignation. Or start naming names. He hung up before the man could reply. Keisha gave him a long look. You really going to war over this? Nathan met her gaze without blinking. No, he said. I'm taking back my father's company. The next morning, tension coiled thick in the air as Nathan stepped into the towering glass atrium of Coleridge Motors' corporate headquarters. The mirrored walls reflected a man who looked calm on the outside, but inside a storm brewed fueled not by fear of losing power, but by the possibility that those who had corrupted his father's vision might succeed in keeping things exactly as they were. He passed rows of marble statues and pristine marketing displays, celebrating excellence, trust, and innovation. Each one now feeling like a bitter joke. On the top floor, the corporate boardroom buzzed with whispered conversations and exchanged glances. A quiet trial already underway before any words were spoken. At the head of the table sat Victor Langston, the slick-talking vice president of operations, and now self-appointed leader of the opposition, flanked by half a dozen shareholders clutching financial reports. This emergency session, Victor announced as Nathan entered, has been called to determine the future leadership of Coleridge Motors. In light of recent unapproved expenditures, deviation from quarterly targets and actions taken without board consent, we are here to vote on the removal of Nathan Cole as CEO. A few members shifted uncomfortably, not entirely convinced, but too afraid to show it. Nathan remained silent as he took his seat, motioning for Dana to distribute sealed folders to each member. "I have the right to make a final statement," he said, voice clear, unwavering. 15 minutes, that's all I ask." Victor gave a smug nod, certain no speech could undo the damage. The lights dimmed as Nathan clicked a remote, and a projection lit up the room. His first slide, not a graph, but a photograph. His father, standing proudly in front of the original Coleridge garage, grease on his cheek hands resting on the hood of an old Buick, smiling like a man who still believed integrity was profitable. "My father didn't build a company to chase numbers," Nathan began. "He built it to fix cars, to give honest work to people who needed it, and to create a business where skill and decency mattered more than spreadsheets. In 5 years, we've grown profits by 42%. But at what cost?" The slide changed. Images of broken tools, stained safety gloves, and finally a close-up of Keisha's bloodied hand. A murmur swept through the room. "These are the real numbers," Nathan said, voice rising. "These are the consequences of our obsession with efficiency. People got hurt, people were silenced, and we called it optimization." Victor stood, face reddening. "This is emotional manipulation, irrelevant to financial performance. Then open your folder." Nathan cut in. Slowly, the board members peeled open the seals. Inside copies of audit findings, falsified reports, embezzlement records, and worst of all, transcriptions of Victor's own voice colluding with Dean Weller to suppress safety concerns and fire that black mechanic before she became a liability. Dead silence. Nathan let the evidence speak for itself before delivering the final blow. 3 weeks after implementing the reforms in Garage 12, productivity increased by 28%. Customer complaints, 0. Operating profit up 15%. Turns out safety and dignity don't destroy profit. They drive it. A chair creaked as a shareholder stood. Then another. The vote was swift and nearly unanimous. Nathan remained CEO, Victor, and 3 others were removed pending an internal investigation. But Nathan didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was only justice finally beginning to take root. 3 weeks later, the newly renovated Garage 12 reopened with bright LED lighting, state-of-the-art hydraulic lifts, ergonomic tool racks, and most importantly, a plaque mounted at the entrance that read, "Built on integrity, rebuilt with courage." Keisha stood just beneath it, wearing a clean navy jumpsuit, embroidered with her new title, Director of Safety and Compliance, National Division. Her bandaged hand was long gone, but the scar remained visible when she raised her arm to cut the red ribbon as camera shutters clicked. Nathan stood beside her, no longer in disguise, no longer distant, but present, attentive to every detail, every voice, every face in the crowd. "Every garage now has real safety protocols," Keisha announced into the mic, eyes sweeping across the gathered mechanics and press. "Ongoing training, whistleblower protection, and equipment that doesn't send people to the ER. If a jack fails now, we replace it, not the person under it." Applause rippled through the audience, but Keisha's eyes found Nathan's. "And we're not stopping here." That afternoon, in a modest office overlooking the garage floor, Keisha pored over audit reports from the remaining garages. Dana stood nearby, highlighting red flags. "We've already removed 6 regional managers," she reported. "And the tip line is filling up fast. People are finally speaking out." Nathan entered, holding another folder. "I want this reviewed next," he said, handing it to Keisha. "It's from the Midwest Division, same signs, budget spikes, maintenance delays, unexplained injuries." She took it, nodding. "We'll dig in." Then she paused, looking at him closely. "You sure you're ready for the heat that's still coming?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "It's long overdue." Just then his phone buzzed. Another message from Frank, his now former CFO. "The board's pushing back again. Still unhappy with expenditures. They're pressuring shareholders." Keisha raised an eyebrow. What's your next move? Nathan smiled faintly, but there was steel behind it, to remind them that people aren't liabilities. They're the engine. If they can't see that, they can step aside. He turned to Dana. Call a shareholder forum, public. Let every garage employee attend. Keisha leaned back, arms folded. You're putting mechanics in the same room as investors. Not in the same room, Nathan corrected. At the same table. She stared at him for a moment longer, then said with a quiet grin, Maybe you really did learn something under that cap. Nathan chuckled. You think that was the hard part? Wait until they see what we're building next. Outside the window, the garage hummed with new energy lifts, rising tools gleaming. Workers laughing for the first time in months. But deep within the corporate structure of Coleridge Motors, resistance still brewed, and Nathan knew this transformation wasn't a one-time fix. It was a long road, but now Keisha was walking beside him, not as a symbol, not as a survivor, but as a leader. The following week, the transformation expanded beyond blueprints and boardrooms. Garage 7 in Dallas, Garage 3 in Milwaukee, and Garage 18 in Oakland all underwent surprise audits. 3 more managers were quietly removed, while whistleblower reports surged from underpaid, overlooked mechanics, who now felt for the first time that someone was listening. Meanwhile, inside the newly formed Integrity Council, an advisory body created by Nathan Keisha sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dana and Sophia, reviewing safety proposals submitted directly from employees. One by one, she read them aloud. Garage 22 requests heat-resistant gloves to replace cotton stock. She said, Garage 31 needs ergonomic creepers. Garage 4 requests better lighting in the inspection bays. Nathan, sitting across from her, approved each without hesitation. Done all of them. Keisha tilted her head slightly. You're not even going to question the budget impact. He leaned forward. You once said, people like you aren't given the tools to do the job that ends now. But just as the reforms picked up momentum, a shadow loomed larger. Nathan received an encrypted email from a whistleblower inside corporate accounting, Victor Langston. Despite being removed from the board, had been secretly coordinating with a faction of shareholders, planning to seize control through a proxy vote. Their goal: reinstate the old structure, freeze the renovations, and frame Nathan's reforms as reckless spending. Nathan called an emergency strategy session that night. Keisha, Dana, Sophia, and 2 trusted employees from the original Garage 12 gathered in a locked room beneath headquarters. They're coming for your chair, Dana warned. They want a quiet CEO who signs papers and doesn't ask questions. Keisha looked directly at Nathan. Then you need to stop playing defense. Nathan met her gaze, and for the first time the fatigue showed in his eyes. I thought fixing the garages was the battle, he admitted. But this is a war for the soul of the company. Keisha stood, slowly placing both palms on the table. Then let's fight it like mechanics do. We take it apart piece by piece, see what's broken, and we rebuild it stronger. A hush fell across the room. Nathan nodded, agreed. No more quiet. No more compromise. Plans were drawn. Employees were notified. Legal channels were activated. And most importantly, Keisha recorded a video message, not for investors, not for executives, but for the thousands of Coleridge workers across the country. She looked into the camera, her voice steady. You've worked in silence under broken lights with broken tools and broken promises. But that ends here. You are not replaceable, you are not invisible. You are the reason this company runs. And we will not let them forget that again. When the message went live, it exploded, shared across every garage, every inbox, every employee network. The movement wasn't just alive, it was accelerating. The shareholder assembly room pulsed with tension as Nathan Cole stepped into the spotlight, flanked not just by executives but by mechanics, safety leads, and floor workers. Flown in from every corner of the country, faces once ignored, now seated with purpose. Keisha sat near the front, her presence quiet but unshakable, a living reminder of the blood and grit behind the company's glossy reputation. Victor Langston, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, arrived with the swagger of a man convinced he had already won, nodding to proxy holders as if sealing his fate in advance. He strode to the podium with a polished smirk and opened the meeting with his trademark confidence, declaring that Coleridge Motors needs realignment, not revolution, and accusing Nathan of sacrificing profitability for populism. But Nathan didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded once to Dana Kim, who dimmed the lights and began the presentation. The room fell silent as a reel of damning footage filled the screen. Garage surveillance showing injuries, ignored mechanics working under flickering lights, broken jacks failing. Then came audio clips, Victor scoffing at safety audits, dismissing Keisha as an overpaid PR stunt and colluding to shut down the reform movement from the inside. As the final image of Keisha's scarred hand faded from the screen, the silence was suffocating. Nathan stood and addressed the board, not with anger, but clarity. This company was built on my father's hands, not just his numbers. Since our reforms began, productivity has risen 17%. Safety complaints have dropped by over 30%, and our employees, our real assets, are finally being seen. Victor shot to his feet, red-faced and furious. This is sentimental theater, not leadership. We can't let grease-stained workers dictate board policy. But before he could say another word, Keisha rose. She walked slowly to the center, looked Victor in the eye, and said, "You think we're grease-stained? That stain built your paycheck. You buried our injuries and called it optimization. But we're still here. Still standing." She turned to the board. "You asked for numbers. Here's 1-0. That's how many lives should be risked for a quarterly bonus." The room erupted in applause, not polite, not political, but thunderous. The vote that followed was swift and clear. Victor Langston was removed from all roles. 3 other board allies were suspended pending investigation, and Keisha Morgan was officially appointed Director of National Operations and Ethics, with a permanent seat on the board. As the meeting closed, she didn't celebrate. She simply looked at Nathan across the room, nodded once, and returned to her seat. Not as a survivor, but as a leader who had turned broken tools into power and silence into policy. 2 months later, the headquarters of Coleridge Motors unveiled its newest division, the Center for Safety and Workforce Innovation, a state-of-the-art facility nestled beside the original garage where Nathan's father had once turned wrenches with bare hands and unshakable ethics. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, it wasn't Nathan but Keisha who stood at the podium, flanked by engineers, union leaders, and a new class of apprentices. Young men and women from marginalized communities, many of them holding tools for the first time in their lives. "This center is not about rewriting the past," she said into the mic, voice firm and steady. "It's about refusing to repeat it. We're training mechanics not just to fix cars, but to lead to question, to protect one another. No more working in silence, no more bleeding in back bays with no one watching." Cameras flashed as she cut the ribbon, her scarred hand steady on the scissors, a symbol not of weakness but survival. Behind her, a plaque was unveiled. The Morgan Initiative named not for herself, but for her father, the man whose garage was lost in a corporate acquisition, and whose legacy now lived on in every lesson taught within those walls. Nathan stood to the side, watching with quiet pride, knowing the real work had just begun. Back in his office later that evening, he received a report. Profits were still climbing, retention was at an all-time high, and for the first time in the company's history, the annual employee survey scored a 93% trust rating. But the most important call came not from a shareholder, but from the night manager at Garage 4. A junior technician had reported a faulty lift, and instead of ignoring it, the team shut down the bay and followed protocol without hesitation. "That's the culture shift," Nathan whispered to himself. Downstairs, Keisha entered the office holding a fresh audit. 3 more garages passed, inspection. 0 violations. She reported, then glanced at the portrait of Nathan's father behind the desk. "Think he'd be proud." Nathan looked at her then, at the busy garage just beyond the window, where workers now laughed instead of flinched, where no one bled into silence, and said, "He'd be proud of you." She didn't smile, just nodded once. "Then let's keep building." And so, they did not just systems and training centers, but a new kind of company forged from broken parts and second chances, driven not by fear, but by respect. Because in the end, real power wasn't in profit margins or polished speeches. It was in handing someone the right tool and finally stepping aside so they could use it. One brisk morning at Garage 12, a film crew arrived unannounced. commissioned by a national labor rights organization to document the turnaround story of Coleridge Motors. At first, the staff was hesitant, but when Keisha walked into the bay grease on her sleeve clipboard in hand, they straightened not out of fear, but out of pride. She wasn't just a face on the board now. She was still one of them. The crew captured shots of spotless tool stations, safety checklists on every wall, and workers laughing over shared coffee instead of bracing for shouting managers. In one interview, a new hire named Luis, a 19-year-old first-generation American, spoke with wonder. "It's the first time I've worked somewhere where people ask if I'm okay, where I don't have to hide when I mess up." Later that day, the cameras followed Keisha to the training center named after her father. She led a session herself, teaching apprentices how to spot wear on brake lines, but paused midway to tell them a story, not from a textbook, but from memory. "I once fixed a truck with a broken jack, a stripped wrench, and gloves that barely held together. I was proud of what I could do back then, but I was angry too, because I shouldn't have had to work like that." Her voice softened. "Never let them tell you that. Suffering builds character. You already have character. You deserve tools that work. You deserve to go home, whole." That clip later went viral. Meanwhile, Nathan stood before a group of high school students on a tour of the new corporate office, explaining how the company had changed. When one student asked, "What was the hardest part?" Nathan didn't talk about board votes or shareholder fights. He said, "The hardest part was realizing I was part of the problem, even when I meant well. It took a woman with a scar and no fear to show me that good intentions mean nothing without action." That night, Keisha found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a hand-drawn thank you card from Luis's little sister, who'd visited the garage that afternoon. It read in blocky, colorful letters, "Thank you for making my brother safe." She held it for a long time, before slipping it into the top drawer of her filing cabinet, next to the faded photo of her dad standing outside his old shop, the one she once thought was lost forever. But some legacies don't die. They just wait for the right hands to carry them forward. Months later, as winter rolled in and frost lined the edges of the garage windows, Keisha stood under the soft hum of fluorescent lights, watching a group of young apprentices tighten their final bolts on a training chassis, their laughter bouncing off the walls like music. She didn't say much, didn't need to. Her presence had become its own form of leadership, not loud or ceremonial, but steady, like a torque wrench in the right hands. Across the country, garages that once ran on fear now ran on respect. Lifts that used to groan under faulty weight were replaced by pristine machines. And workers who once whispered complaints now raised concerns without flinching. Nathan, now more mentor than executive, visited Garage 18 in person to surprise the night crew with a new shipment of custom-fitted tools, each one engraved with the employee's name and the words, "Because you matter." That small detail, so simple, became a company-wide tradition. But outside the walls of Coleridge Motors, not everyone was celebrating. A rival CEO from an old guard automotive firm published a scathing op-ed accusing Nathan of prioritizing sentiment over scale, warning investors that empathy doesn't generate margins. The article trended briefly, only to be buried by the release of Coleridge's latest financial report. Profits up again, employee satisfaction soaring, and 3 safety innovation patents filed under Keisha's department. When a reporter asked her for comment, she didn't gloat. She simply said, "You'd be amazed what people can build when you stop breaking them." The world took notice. Trade unions began inviting her to speak. Universities reached out for lectures, and job applications poured in from across the country, from technicians who'd sworn off corporate garages until now. But late one evening, after the celebrations had died down and the shop lights dimmed, Keisha sat alone in her small office beside Garage 12, rubbing her thumb over the scar on her palm, not out of pain, but remembrance. Because she knew what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, and nearly broken by a system that called itself efficient. She knew what it cost to speak up and what it meant to stay standing. And as she looked out at the quiet shop floor, where another mechanic, someone new, someone young, someone like she once was locking up with a smile instead of a limp, she whispered to herself, not a speech, not a plan, but a promise. Never again. The following spring, the very first National Conference on Ethical Labor in the Automotive Industry was hosted not in Washington or New York, but at Coleridge Motors' newly rebuilt Garage 1, once a forgotten repair shop, now a symbol of reform carved into steel and concrete. Keisha opened the event, standing on a simple wooden platform in front of rows of folding chairs, filled with former skeptics, industry leaders, policymakers, and dozens of workers in faded overalls with oil still under their nails. There were no velvet ropes, no luxury banquets, just truth in its rawest form. She didn't start with charts or slides. She started with silence a moment to remember the names in old accident files, the hands that had once been bandaged in dirty rags, the workers who had never gotten their second chance. Then she spoke. We used to work under broken lights with broken tools for people who saw us as costs to be managed. Today we build something different, not just safer garages, but a new standard one, where dignity isn't optional and silence isn't survival. Her words weren't polished, but they didn't need to be. They lived. Meanwhile, Nathan sat toward the back, unshaven in jeans and a flannel shirt, no longer the symbol of corporate distance, but of personal reckoning. A reporter approached him later that day, voice cautious. What was it that changed your mind? Nathan looked out at the garage where mechanics were giving live demos beside legal advisors and engineers. A scar, he answered quietly, and the woman who refused to hide it. That afternoon, the company announced a new policy. Every executive before stepping into leadership must spend 2 weeks working alongside technicians on the floor. No exceptions, no titles, just oil noise and humanity. Keisha's idea unanimously approved. That night, as the garage emptied and a warm wind rustled through the banners, still hanging from the rafters, Keisha stood once again beneath the same crooked light where she'd once bled alone. Only now the light had been replaced, shining brighter than ever, and as she looked around at what had grown from pain, her voice low and steady, she said to herself and to those who would follow, "We didn't just fix the system, we built a new one." Years later, under a golden dusk sky, a young woman named Amira stepped nervously into the Coleridge Motors Training Center, clutching a worn backpack and a quiet dream. Her boots were dusty, her hands calloused from fixing engines in alleyways, and she had almost convinced herself she didn't belong until she saw the plaque by the front door. In honor of Keisha Morgan, who proved that a scar can be the beginning, not the end. Inside, framed photos lined the hall. Garages once broken, now thriving, workers once silenced, now leading, and at the very end, a picture of Keisha herself. Eyes steady, hands folded, standing beside a mural of her late father's shop. Amira paused, then reached out to touch the corner of the frame as if to borrow strength. What she didn't know was that Keisha now retired from day-to-day operations, but still watching every safety report like a hawk was in the next room, preparing to teach her first class in months. Because systems may change, titles may pass, but the real work never ends. It lives in every hand that turns a wrench with dignity, every voice that dares to speak up, and every young mechanic who walks through the door, believing not just in machines, but in themselves. What began as a silent struggle in the shadows of a broken garage became a nationwide reckoning, one scar, one voice, and one act of courage at a time. Keisha Morgan didn't just fix cars, she rebuilt a culture. And Nathan Cole didn't just regain control of his company, he reclaimed its soul. In a world that often values numbers over people, this story reminds us that true leadership starts the moment we choose to listen, to act, and to stand beside those who were once ignored. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, redemption, and the people who change the world from the inside out.